Okay. All right. So hello everyone. I am Kanara Kempestra, and Kemper works just as well. My pronouns are she, her, but they, them, I'll go by any pronoun you call me. And most of my classes typically begin a little on the lecture side, but I really prefer roundtables in which people can contribute. So I'm going to, we are pretty much, if you are a human being, you have experienced grief. This is a trigger class. If you need to leave, feel free to, or if you need to mute, feel free to do that too. So we're going to talk a little bit about grief, but I actually really want to focus mostly on grief support for individuals who are in grief. But I'm going to do a little bit of the psychology of grief, but just briefly. But I would like to start with a poem from Sonnet 18 of Shakespeare. Some have said that this is on grief, and some of this has said, some people analyze this as in love. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's leaf have all short a date. Sometime too hot the eye of heaven shines, and oft is his gold complexion dimmed, and every fair from fair sometime declines, by chance or nature's changing course untrimmed. But thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of that fair thou oust, nor shall death brag thou once rest in his shade, when in internal lines to time thou growest. So long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. I chose that sonnet mainly because of the idea that the love of an individual stays with us even through grief. And I think that that is extremely important because grief is not something you overcome. It is something you learn to live with. And every time you experience grief, it's like a stack of pancakes. So you keep adding more pancakes onto the others, and it just stacks up higher and higher and higher and higher. And so grief, whenever we experience grief, is just another addition to it. And it can be very difficult because when we are grieving personally, that means that we're grieving of everything that's ever happened to us before, from the time you were a child and you lost your first animal on forward into adulthood. It's not something that that changes and stops. And unfortunately, every single grieving process is different. And everybody here has different grieving processes. It's very easy for us to say, well, that person doesn't seem like they're in grief because I wouldn't do that. Well, no, you wouldn't, because you're a different person. And so we have to accept the grief in which other people are presenting. And that is very, very difficult. So we all are aware, I'm assuming, of the 5 stages of grief, which is denial. And by the way, these are not steps that go in marked order, much to the dismay of almost everyone, because we want to get over something. It is something that we kind of go round and round and round. I call it the donut emotion. And that's actually just a trauma phrase. Because grief is a trauma. And then we have grief. Sorry, my papers are not coming out correctly. So we have denial, sadness, Where did it go? Pardon me. Acceptance, bartering, and one more, anger. And that is a constant. We find a lot of people who get angry over grief, and we get caught up in that because it can feed us. It's something to latch onto, and it's one of the hardest emotions, I think, to overcome. What I would like to kind of start off with is actually one, just recognizing that we all grieve. But I really want to also focus on grief hijacking, or competitive grieving, which are actually terms. I know that a lot of us experienced grief a lot this a year ago. And so for me personally, I did not know the people who passed away extremely well. Not, and definitely not better than others. And so it was important to me to support the people who did. And but that can come in many shapes and sizes. The first time I really sorry, grief is really hard for me right now. And just to let you guys know, it's something that, since we don't always get over, we find ourselves back in. So I'm kind of in a process right now, to be very honest with you, where I have some grief going on of my own, which is just a personal nature. So if I'm stumbling through this, please know that I'm slightly triggering myself as I continue. So my apologies for the frequent pauses. With we've met people who have who attempt to like steal the grief from other people. And what happens is that they come up to an individual who is grieving, and the focus of the grief of that individual. So I'm going to use the loss of my dog as an example because it's a little bit safer and it's mine personally. Oh, I had a dog too, and I'm so sorry for your loss. My dog did this. And then they start wailing about the fact that your dog passed away. And that in itself is grief hijacking. And the SCA, what can we do to support that? The fact that the person who is under grief and their grief is being hijacked by somebody else, it's too much. And the person who is hijacking the grief doesn't realize it, but they're putting that other person in a really bad situation, because it means that they can't grieve. They have to stop grieving themselves and then deal with your grief. So is there any, I do have some suggestions, but I'd like to hear from everybody else, ways in which you have dealt with grief hijacking, because it is a real thing, and it does a lot more damage than you would think. And some of those phrases can include things like, oh, well, you know, my dog passed away and it was really terrible, but you can always get another puppy. And again, that stops the grief. Are there any ways that you all here have learned to help deal with those who are experiencing grief hijacking? So I'm opening that up.
You've actually technically already mentioned it, but like my roommate lost one of their cats recently, and so I think the more appropriate thing is to say is, I'm sorry about your loss. I don't know what that's like. Perhaps you could share that with me instead of saying something like, oh, well, you have other cats. So, like, I haven't said that. So but because it's when you lose an animal, it's like losing a brother or sister, or even a child. And so you can't replace one animal with another and think they equivocate with each other. So that's the only thing I could think of.
That's a really good point. Anybody else? In terms of, I think that's a really good point in terms of saying, you know, recognizing that you're right, one doesn't equal the other. You know, they're very different. I've witnessed other, go ahead, Matilda.
Oh, I was just gonna, well, I know I had a friend who passed and he had a dog. And so I asked the wife, how is the dog handling this? You know, maybe asking how are the other pets dealing with rather than, you know, get another animal or, oh, I had a dog that died, you know, show caring for the other animals. How are they doing?
Right.
Along with how are you doing and how is Skipper doing? Or, you know, or that you're thinking of all of the whole family. I mean, that was just the quickest thing I could think of. And I don't think I pressed the button. I just moved my phone so that indicates again, I just happened to pick up my phone and then you called on me. But yeah. But you know, not only thinking of the person, but if there were like more animals or that was just an example. I said, well, how's the dog doing?
Right.
Does he know what's going on? And she said, well, yeah, he's, you know, kind of looking for him or something. You know, but show caring for others as well as the humans.
Right. I
I
think
guess.
that's a good point. Is to, and caring, I think is a key word there. Because I think that people who are hijacking grief, they truly honestly believe that they're providing kindness and compassion. But they don't realize is that they're putting the onus of the grief onto that other individual. And they're wanting you to put their crisis aside to deal with yours. And that is, and there are times, depending upon that grief, in which they'll make demands of you. Well, you should come to my party. It'll help you, you know, put this behind you. You should come to do this. It'll do this. And instead, a really good way to do that is how are you dealing? Or quietly making dinner for that individual and not making a big fuss about it. But coming up to the other individual and possibly even steering them away from the person who is at a loss. And that way that person has an opportunity. Like I was not emotionally involved in the losses that a lot of people experienced. So I was in a unique situation to be able to steer people away when needed. Because a person who is hijacking your loss is actually being extremely selfish and they don't realize it. And they don't realize the demands that they're putting on. And that can actually be damaging because it turns it into a competition of who can grieve the loudest and who can grieve the longest. And now in Roman society, they actually used to hire professional mourners that would kind of egg everybody on into mourning all at one time. And I don't advocate professional mourners, but we do actually, modern day society, we actually do have those, and they're at funeral homes, people who are there to help you with grief. It's just changed a lot. The other thing you can do is suggest that the person who is in grief cut off contact with that individual, depending upon how bad it gets. However, you have to be in a position close enough to do that. And that can be very, very difficult. Because if you're not involved in the grieving process, then you're putting yourself within the grieving process. And unfortunately, those of us who are DEIB officers, since we have to maintain a bit of neutrality, we have to trod very carefully so that we're not interfering with the belonging side of grief, because grief can pull people together. I was at Ontario War last year, and I was walking by an encampment, and I knew that some of the people in there who were dealing with loss and grief at the time, and it was closed off, but it was extremely nice to hear them laughing and talking and being together in their grief. And it didn't indicate that no one was making fun of the grief. It was just laughter as a release for us. And so, but they wouldn't have been able to do that if other people who were not a part of that grief circle were involved in that process. And so I do believe that as DEI officers, it's important for us then to help define those boundaries on grief. The one thing that I've had to work on myself is to ask somebody, are you okay? No, they're not okay. They're grieving. So there are better questions that can be asked besides that. Does anybody here have other questions that they typically ask in order to help people who are grieving and which you know it? Can you share?
Yeah. What do you need right now? What the question is?
Oh,
question to ask
sorry.
the question to ask people is, what do you need right now? You know, in a mundane situation, several months ago, a friend of mine, an acquaintance of mine posted like that somebody in their family had passed away, and that from, you know, 12 p.m. to 5 p.m. on these days, I'm going to need help cleaning up the house and getting stuff packed up and ready to like be taken to Goodwill or whatever.
Right.
You know, specific, like if somebody is not able to be that specific, you can ask them. But like when people put out calls to the community for things like that, when people say, this is what I need help with, you show up. When people say, this is the boundary I have set, please do not ask me questions about my grief. Please do not. So you do not bring it, you respect people's boundaries. But like, that's the question. I don't know where I learned that question, but it's, what do you need right now? Because sometimes people are, you know, when they're in the middle of their grief, and it's grief is chaos, right? Grief is chaotic. They might not know exactly what they need on a bigger scale, but like maybe right now they need a snack. Maybe right now they need you to go fill their water bottle. You know, maybe they need you to come over and go for a walk with them. You know, like, what do you need in this moment to bring them back to the moment too, to bring them back to the present moment? Sometimes
I agree with that.
Yeah.
I had a friend once who said, I can't solve your problem, but what can I do for you now? And she came up with her little girl and her baby, and the little girl brought me her teddy bear to use as long as I needed to. We went for a walk to the supermarket, and this woman who was a healthy eater, bought the weirdest combination of food possibly to divert me, but she bought head cheese and chocolate mousse, and she ate it all. And I was just kind of amazed at this. But that's what she did for me. What do you need? Like she did, what do you need right now? And that's what she did. And so I agree with what you were saying.
I like
Sometimes
the
it's just something you need right now.
Yeah, and I like that idea of bringing people back into the moment. You said, Nessa, like, that's a big thing because it's so easy to get on that grief carousel and it's so hard to get off.
Yeah, because like you said earlier, you know, in the very beginning, you said grief is a trauma. And when people experience trauma and even after that trauma is over, if you talk about it, it can bring you right back into that moment. Right. And grief hijacking brings people back into that moment. They might have been having a great day, and then you come up to them and start, you know, talking about the person who passed away, and you've brought them right back to that moment. And I don't know if people who don't have CPTSD can completely understand that, but everybody has had some form of loss in their life that maybe if we can figure out a better way to communicate that, and you're doing a great job with this presentation, by the way, that, you know, like figuring out ways to, like, I don't know. I don't want to say to people that grief hijacking is a microaggression, but it is, right? Because, you know, yeah, I think it definitely is. It's nobody intends to be aggressive by expressing their condolences to you, but it's the way you do it, right?
Yeah, I actually, you know, that's a really good point in terms of condolences, is to let people know, hey, I'm thinking of you. If you need me, I'm here. Well, that person then never contacts you, but maybe it's because they don't need you. They need somebody else. As DEI officers, that does mean, though, that we get to be able to be in a unique position of steering the person because it's a small society, and we basically live in small social organisms, right? Or that's not the word looking for, organizations, right? And so it doesn't take too long to identify if there's someone who is grief hijacking, who that person is. As DEI, it is within our ability to transition that person away. Or when you see somebody who is being hijacked, to come up to them and say, hey, may I speak with you for a second? No offense. It's private. And what that does is that it breaks them away from leaving and then allows, but instead of pushing the other person away, if that makes any sense. And also you can just say, thought you might need a break. I could be wrong. I apologize if I did, but here I am. And we do, as DEIB officers, have that ability to, because we are already looking at people who need assistance, because it's in our nature, it's in our blood, it's in our DNA to do that. I have found that to say to somebody, and I just recently, actually, there was someone here, I'm at work, someone here at work, and I said, hey, I'm a student of life. It's okay. It's okay to grieve. I'm sorry, I don't mean to unload. I'm a student of life. This is part of life. It's okay. And just letting her talk. But just that small connection of saying, I'm a student of life, or hey, I have been there, is enough. We don't have to go into depth at all. Because especially with PTSD and people who are experiencing grief, as Nelson pointed out, they are experiencing a PTSD. Now, there's maybe overcomable, and I don't know that, I'm not a shrink, but at the same time, that's an area we can relate to. And when we see somebody hijacking, that puts that other individual, that means that they're running from what my shrink and I call the saber-toothed tiger. And in whatever form it takes. And so we can help with that, kindly and compassionately. And I think that it is important to do that. It's also, you mentioned the head cheese.
Yeah.
Yeah. Providing, dropping off food for someone and just like ringing the doorbell or calling them and leaving a text after you've left that says, hey, go to your front door. There's something for you. I had a friend who did this for me. Actually, she really did. She'd say, I'd be like, I can't deal right now. I can't people. And 2 hours later, she'd say, hey, go to your front door and open it. She wasn't there, but that soup that she made was really good. And it was filling.
I would have taken the mousse, but not the cheese.
Well, I also do actually, yeah, I live in an area where moose could have gotten into the chicken noodle soup, but it was good soup, so I would have fought them for it. I think
good.
Yes, it is. It is. One of the things that I hear from both of you is validation. And I think you guys have both hit on something that's extremely important, is validation. Because I still mourn the loss of my dog, Rowan. It hurts me so much. It happened 3 or 4 years ago. And I've had people be like, well, you should be over that by now. I don't have to be. I mean, I'm not standing on a table screaming, you should come to me because my dog died 4 years ago. But it's okay for me to say, and I've said to them, it's okay for me to grieve on this. We can give that to other individuals. We can say, it's okay to grieve. It's okay to move to, what do you need in the moment? I really like that. I think I'm probably going to borrow that idea of in the moment.
I learned that from Mistress Kata.
Okay.
Who passed a few years ago. But that's one thing I remember her words and what, just how it's something I try to use myself when I'm, dealing with other people. What do you need now? What can I do for you now?
I really, really like that a lot. I think I'd like to I don't have as much time as I did because I started a little bit later. But does anybody else have any suggestions or things that they have done that help other people in their grief? Okay.
I just last week I sent somebody who I knew was gonna, okay, it's my mom. My mom is gonna have to say goodbye to her dog soon. We don't know exactly when it's gonna be, but like I sent her an essential oil blend that I made for helping process grief, and a bottle of grief relief spray from Preston Services, which you can use. You can use it in your mouth or spray it around you. I said, hey, for when this happens, when it's time,
right?
You might even need it now, like, because grief is not linear. Because grief can start if somebody's going to pass. That they have a terminal illness. People can start grieving that when they find that out,
right?
And also, 5 years after it happened, they can be grieving. Like you said, it doesn't, it doesn't matter that it happened in the past. I happen to, as part of my separate thing, is like I do ceremonies for people who have had pregnancy losses. I've also done ceremonies for people who have had pet losses. So like this is my area of spiritual help. So if if you have resources like that, share them with people, is my suggestion.
I've told people I lit a candle for you, and people, it transcends any type of religious views or moralistic views, or it doesn't have to be a religious view either, but to say to somebody, I lit a candle for you, sometimes can go a long way. I would say also, though, is that grief is something that can also bog us down beyond our ability to breathe and to cope. If you note somebody is grieving and when I say unhealthy, I mean in a way that you realize that they're dirty all the time, they're not eating, they're not communicating, they're not participating, and it's been a year or so, is that it's okay for us to say, I am worried about you. I think your depression is a little bit more than you think. I just recently told a friend, hey, your depression is natural and normal because you're grieving. However, this has been going on for a while. I'm very worried about you. If you decide to seek help, I will go with you. I will be your person. I'll sit in the car. I'll read a book, won't ask you a question. We can either go out for a coffee, a lemonade, or a shot of tequila at the end of the day. You pick. And then I made the same offer a month later. And I just said, hey, I'm just going to keep hacking, once a month, I'm just going to check up on you just to make sure you're okay. Because when we get for those of us who are grieving, when we have somebody, when we say no consistently, a lot of times people drop off the face of the earth and then they stop asking. And I think that when we stop asking, even if it's mentally, I think that's when the true isolation begins. And we, by human and evolutionary standards, are social creatures. Even if you're an introvert to the extreme, we need people and that connection. And so it is okay to 5 years later say, hey, how you doing? I was thinking of you the other day. Do you want to go walking? And to keep the door open as opposed to close. In closing, I would remind us all that there are so many levels of grief. I have that it is almost unfathomable because there are griefs in breakups, there is griefs in pet loss, there are griefs in partners, there are griefs in not getting the job you wanted. There's a lot of grief in the world, and sometimes those who are grieving a lot need to be reminded that the sunshine does come and you can still grieve in the sunshine. Like, that's okay. And as DEIB officers, we have that ability to step in our positions. Nissa and I have talked a couple of times because some of the things that I've had to do in the principality, I'm like, yeah, I can't really report on this area because I literally had to take my trappings off, put them down and go, okay, this is Kemper talking to you. It is okay for us to put aside everything from head to toe in the SCA and say, and this is a phrase my kiddo taught me, which is powerful. They said, from one human being to another. And then they put their words into play. And I have found that to be a very big thing, is to just say, from one human being to another, I see you're hurting. That you don't have to, that's it. And we have the ability to transcend our office to be and offer our selves from one human being to another. And I think that's probably what draws us all to DEIB, ultimately. Does anyone have anything else to add? I do want to kind of end this on a positive note, and I'm going to start. You don't have to name the thing, person, animal, etc. But I would like us to end with providing a positive and happy thought about a element of grief in which we have become accustomed to living with. And I will start. In one of my griefs, the memory that makes me happy when I think back is that the person I lost loved being who they were. Loved being who they were. And it made me realize that it was okay for me to love being who I am. I can't always practice that. CPTSD is a bitch. But it is something that I do think about. Like, hey, it's okay. I can love being who I am. Anybody else? I'm just going to call on everyone as we go. Teleanor, do you have anything?
I think Teleanor might be involved in helping the
Okay.
rooms, but
All right, well,
her name.
you're on you're next on my oh I gotcha.
Hi, what's going on
Hi.
the screen?
Yeah. Do you need me to repeat?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So I'm asking everyone to end on a happy element is that one thing and one treasure that someone in whom you've lost or what have you in your grief, a positive thing that you've been able to take with you into life about that one. Mine was the person, entity loved being who they were.
Oh, that's nice. That's a good one. It's important to be who you are, even if
Yeah.
other people don't believe it.
That's true. Definitely. So is there anything that you can think of?
I'm sure if I put my mind to it, I would.
Okay.
But I've been having a lovely conversation in the other chat room.
Okay. Okay. Nissa, do you have anyone or anything?
Yeah, I think I would say that my friend Nigel's superpower was, trying to stand up for people who didn't have the ability to stand up for themselves. And I mean, I surround myself with people like that now, but
Nice.
that's it.
All right. Lord Edward?
I'm reminded of something. I don't know who wrote it, but I often walk down memory lane for I know I will run into you there.
Nice. I like that. Like that. Matilda?
A loss drove me to be more active with another group of people that were not in the previous group. And I think they may have saved my life, diverting me, and I made so many more new friends. It did take me away from the SCA for a while doing these other new activities, but I've had these friends now for 30 years, and still hanging around, and doing things. And then came back to the SCA after another loss, realizing that I never got to know that person. So I need to get back to seeing SCA friends again.
Right.
So, I guess that all sort of turned out, and now I'm just kind of grieving that I'm getting old and can't do SCA as much anymore. But glad to have made so many, more new friends.
Awesome.
Big meeting new people and making new friends.
Awesome. I like that. Rafiq Al Hasibid.
Rafiq.
Sorry.
I don't know if.
Nope.
they're
Okay, so
there.
all right. So this has been wonderful. Sorry. Okay. I'm signing everyone off. Thank you so much for coming and participating and being willing to be recorded. I'm gonna try to redo this class at Ontier West Ward. And so I would please, my email is available. It's at kemperwestkingdom.org. Oh, he's at work. Sorry. Okay. He's just listening in. And so if you have any feedback, positive, negative, anything, I would love to hear it because it just helps me to become a better facilitator. So thank you all for this opportunity. I greatly appreciate it.